Let's start things off by just taking a deep, slow breath together. Seriously, just pause for a second. If you've clicked on this explainer, there is a very, very good chance that you are tired. And I don't just mean physically tired from a long day at the office or needing a nap. I'm talking about a deep, resonant, almost spiritual exhaustion that feels like it's just seeped into your very bones. You know the feeling, right? You might be constantly striving. You're out there optimizing your morning routine, tracking your micro habits, listening to endless productivity hacks on your commute, and yet, despite doing all the right things, you still feel like you're perpetually falling behind. Well, today, we're going to explore a radical and honestly, deeply comforting idea: you need to stop forcing yourself to become a better version of you. Because as we're going to see throughout this explainer, this race you're running, it literally has no finish line.
So, let's ask the big question. Why are we so tired all the time? I want you to really genuinely reflect on your own persistent sense of fatigue and inadequacy for a moment. When you fail to meet a goal you've set for yourself, or when you feel that familiar wave of burnout washing over you, where do you place the blame? Well, if you're like most of us, you almost certainly blame yourself. You tell yourself, I just didn't have enough discipline, or I didn't work smart enough, or I should have woken up at 5 a.m. like that CEO. But what if I told you that this persistent, crushing fatigue isn't a personal failure at all? What if it's actually the intended, mathematical result of the invisible structures of our modern world? Today, we are taking that heavy burden of blame right off your shoulders, and we're shifting it to the very architecture of the society we live in. To do this, we're bringing in a truly phenomenal guide. We're going to dive deep into a profound little book called The Burnout Society by the philosopher Byung-Chul Han. Now, this book is going to serve as the grounding text for our whole discussion today. But let me be clear right up front. This is absolutely not a self-help book. He's not giving you 5 tips to beat burnout. Instead, what Han offers is a deeply humanistic, almost clinical diagnosis for our exhausted souls. He looks out at the landscape of the 21st century and he makes this brilliant observation. Our defining afflictions today are no longer viral or bacterial. They are neuronal. We're dealing with a massive rise in things like depression, ADHD, and of course, burnout. And to truly understand why our neurons are misfiring so badly, we have to trace back a massive, fundamental historical shift in human behavior.
Which brings us to Section 1, the shift, the disappearance of the other. Okay, so to understand why we are all so currently exhausted, we have to look backwards for a second to see how we arrived here. We need to mark a fundamental shift in how society operates, and crucially, how we are governed. Back in the past, as the famous philosopher Michel Foucault described it, we lived in what he called a disciplinary society. Just picture the institutions of the past. It was a world built around hospitals, madhouses, prisons, barracks, and sprawling factory floors. That entire world was governed by one incredibly powerful word: should. It was a society defined by negativity, by strict prohibitions, and by absolute obedience to external rules. But Han argues, and this is key, we simply don't live in that world anymore. We have transitioned into an achievement society. Think about our modern landscape. Our world is made of gleaming fitness studios, massive office towers, banks, and shopping malls. The operating word is no longer should, it has been completely replaced by an unlimited, overly enthusiastic can. We are no longer obedient subjects merely following orders, we are now achievement subjects. We are entirely driven by our own initiatives, our side projects, and this intense, overwhelming hyper-individualism.
Now here is where things get really interesting. In that older disciplinary society, there was always a very clear external boundary. You had a traditional boss on the factory floor, or the state, or the law, or even God. In philosophical terms, there was a definitive other to push against. Now make no mistake, this other might have been deeply oppressive, but it did something vital. It provided limits. It provided a hard boundary that essentially said, this is exactly what you must do, and once it is done, you are finished. You can go home. But in our glorious transition to the achievement society, this external authority has completely vanished. We essentially removed the boss standing over our shoulder with a clipboard, and we genuinely thought we were liberating ourselves.
Han perfectly captures the irony of this when he observes, the achievement subject stands free from any external instance of domination. It is lord and master of itself. Now, at first glance, that sounds like pure utopia, right? Total unbridled freedom. No one is telling you what to do. But Han points out the trap. Today, this other, that external boss, has vanished into deep narcissism. By becoming the lords and masters of ourselves, we haven't become free. We've just turned into isolated, anxious entrepreneurs of our own lives. We treat ourselves like personal brands that need constant managing. We are our own PR team, our own middle managers, and our own harshest critics. And as we are about to see, this boundless, unanchored freedom feels unbelievably heavy.
Section 2. The mechanics of exhaustion. The crisis of gratification. Let's unpack how this actually breaks us down. We are currently living through a massive, society-wide crisis of gratification. Think about it. Historically, getting a sense of recognition and gratification actually required an other. If you did a good job, your boss patted you on the back, or your community praised you, or your religion offered you salvation. There was an external validation. But today, because modern individuals act as their own bosses, we are utterly incapable of genuinely rewarding ourselves. It's a paradox. You literally cannot be both the one demanding the grueling work and the one granting the ultimate satisfying validation. It just doesn't work neurologically. Without that external instance to look at us and acknowledge our accomplishment, we are left feeling completely hollow, constantly seeking a closure that we literally cannot provide for ourselves.
So, what is the result of this? It's like being stuck on a treadmill that has absolutely no stop button. Because there's no external barrier anymore. There's no boss to forcefully tell you, hey, go home, the shift is over, and there's no authority to finally say, stop, you've done enough. The pursuit of success becomes totally objectless. You just keep running. You are working out into the open void, without any definitive forms of closure. Think about your own life. You finish a major project, and instantly, your internal manager starts demanding the next one, right? You hit a fitness goal you've been working towards for months, and immediately, almost instinctually, the target moves. You need to lift heavier, run faster. The treadmill just keeps accelerating, and you're the one hitting the speed button.
Which leads us directly into a very dark evolution of human behavior: auto-exploitation. This is the voluntary exploitation of oneself. In the past, what we had was allo-exploitation, meaning being exploited by someone else. And while that was terrible, it naturally had limits, because the exhausted worker would eventually resist the cruel master. They'd go on strike or revolt. But auto-exploitation? Oh, it is far more efficient and far more destructive. Why? Because it masquerades as freedom. You actually think you are just out there hustling for your own self-improvement. You are simultaneously the ruthless guard and the exhausted prisoner. You are the master and the slave. You haven't escaped the labor camp, you have just internalized it. You've brought the labor camp inside your own mind.
I really want you to listen to the tragic irony of our modern condition in this quote from Hahn. The depressive human being is an animal laborance that exploits itself. It is predator and prey at once. Just let that sink in. Predator and prey at once. We are voluntarily destroying ourselves. We are running this constant, entirely unwinnable race with a phantom self, this idealized, perfectly optimized version of ourselves that lives in our heads, which we can never actually catch. And the real tragedy? Because we think we are running this race freely, because we think it's our choice, we don't even realize that we are actively hunting ourselves to exhaustion.
Moving to Section 3. The climax, redefining modern depression.
So how does all this constant narcissistic self-exploitation actually manifest in our daily lives? It manifests as the absolute defining illness of our age, depression. But we need to look at this differently. Let's compare two very different psychological models to see exactly how Hahn completely redefines what depression actually means today. If you look at Sigmund Freud's classic model of depression and neurosis, it was heavily based on that old disciplinary society we talked about. For Freud, mental illness was all about repressed desires, deep inner conflict, and the negativity of no. It was the ego desperately fighting off forbidden, taboo impulses. But Hahn argues that modern depression is something entirely different. It is not born of negativity or repression. We aren't repressing anything anymore. Instead, modern depression is born of excess positivity. It emerges directly from an environment of boundless yes we can, a complete and total lack of limits, and an overwhelming, crushing overload of stimuli and self-imposed expectations.
Hahn reaches this profound realization that I think captures our exact cultural mood right now. He says that modern depression is the ultimate paralyzing fatigue of an exhausted ego that is simply no longer able to be able. Think about how liberating it is to realize that. It's not that you are restricted from doing what you want. It's not that someone is holding you back. It's that you are so profoundly burnt out by the infinite possibilities and the endless suffocating pressure to achieve that your soul just collapses under the weight of it all. It is a deep, creative fatigue. It is your ego literally overheating like a computer processor and shutting down to protect itself, because it has simply run out of the capacity to perform.
Hahn writes, the complaint of the depressive individual, nothing is possible, can only occur in a society that thinks nothing is impossible. Just take a second with that. When society is constantly screaming at you that you can be anything, you can do anything, you can optimize every single waking second of your life, the violent psychological burden of that excess positivity will eventually break you. Because when literally everything is possible, failing to achieve absolute perfection becomes a crushing, deeply personal failure. And that overwhelming pressure leads straight into the dark despair of feeling like nothing is possible.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, the resolution, the power of not doing.
Now, Han doesn't just diagnose us and leave us in this state of despair. He actually offers a beautiful philosophical antidote to our modern, hyperactive, exhausted state. He calls for a desperately needed return to what he terms the vita contemplativa. This is the capacity for deep, contemplative attention. Right now, just to survive the modern world, we operate with this scattered hyperattention. We are constantly multitasking, jumping from tab to tab, ping to ping, exactly like wild animals, constantly scanning the horizon for threats or prey. But the vita contemplativa is the necessary, deeply humanistic counterbalance to that survival mode. It is the ability to cast a long, slow gaze. It is about the lost art of lingering. It is about actually marveling at the way things are, rather than constantly trying to process them, exploit them, or optimize them for some future goal.
And to achieve this state, we have to reclaim something that modern society has taught us to be absolutely terrified of, and that is boredom. The cultural critic Walter Benjamin once beautifully called deep boredom the dream bird that hatches the egg of experience. Think about that. In our society today, the literal second we feel a hint of boredom, we completely panic. We reflexively pull out our phones, we refresh our feeds, we check emails, we accelerate our walking into a run. We cannot stand the quiet. But Han argues that a purely hectic rush produces absolutely nothing new. It just replicates the same old exhaustion. Deep boredom, on the other hand, is the peak of mental relaxation. It is the quiet, still space where true, original thought and profound, meaningful experience can actually finally hatch.
Now, cultivating this space requires developing what Han calls negative potency. Now, be very careful not to confuse this with impotence. Impotence is a weakness. It's the inability to act. Negative potency, however, is a profoundly active, sovereign power. It is the absolute power not to do something. Think about it. If you only had the positive power to do things, you would just be a mindless slave to every single stimulus, every push notification, and every demand that ever crosses your path. True freedom in the modern world isn't about doing everything possible. True freedom is having the incredible strength, the internal composure, and the deep sovereignty to pause, to resist the manic rush around you, and simply say no.
Ultimately, practicing this negative potency requires a radical reclamation of the concept of the Sabbath. In today's achievement society, let's be honest, we only rest so that we can recover and work even harder on Monday. Our rest is highly, aggressively purposed. We recharge our batteries like we're just machines. But Han suggests we urgently need a time of peace that is completely and utterly free of the in order to. We need to carve out a sacred space of pure, purposeless rest. A deep, world-trusting tiredness where your exhausted ego finally loosens its grip. A space where we stop trying to master our surroundings, stop trying to optimize our lives, and we simply exist alongside things in a state of calm, friendly indifference.
So I leave you with this to ponder. What actually happens when you finally grant yourself the negative potency to step off that treadmill? What happens when you truly internalize that this frantic race of endless self-improvement has absolutely no finish line, and you choose with your own sovereign power to simply stop running? I really hope this explainer brings some much-needed peace to your exhausted soul today. Thank you so much for taking the time to slow down, to linger, and to learn with us. Take care of yourselves.